Admiral Jinwoo felt the strange tingling sensation as he stepped through the shimmering portal. One moment he had been standing in the transport bay of the human diplomatic vessel, and the next he found himself in the most incredible room he had ever seen. The chamber was enormous, stretching up so high that the ceiling disappeared into darkness above. The walls seemed to be made of some kind of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue and purple light. The floor beneath his feet was smooth and warm, like polished stone but somehow alive. Strange symbols floated in the air around him, glowing softly before fading away like dying stars. Jinwoo had trained for this moment for 3 years, ever since Earth had received the first communication from the Galactic Council. He had studied hundreds of alien species, learned their customs, practiced diplomatic protocols until he could recite them in his sleep. But nothing had prepared him for actually being here, surrounded by creatures that looked like they had stepped out of humanity's wildest dreams and nightmares. To his left stood a group of beings that looked like they were made of living glass. They were tall and thin, almost transparent, with light dancing inside their bodies like trapped lightning. Their movements were graceful and fluid, and when they turned to look at him, their faces showed no expression he could read. On his right, massive armored creatures sat in specially built chairs that looked more like thrones. Each one was easily 3 times his size, covered in what looked like natural armor plating that shifted from dark green to black as they moved. Their eyes glowed red in the shadows of their helmets, and when one of them shifted position, Jinwoo could hear the grinding sound of metal against stone. Floating above them all were beings that seemed to be made of colored gas, contained within glowing energy fields. They drifted slowly through the air like jellyfish in an ocean, their forms constantly changing shape. Sometimes they looked almost human, other times they spread out into long tentacles of colored mist. When they communicated, Jinwoo could feel their thoughts pressing gently against his mind, speaking without words. But it was the figure at the center of the chamber that commanded his attention. Council Prime Vextar was unlike anything Jinwoo had ever imagined. He stood nearly 4 meters tall, with 4 arms that moved independently of each other. His skin was a deep silver color that seemed to reflect light from within, and his head was crowned with what looked like natural crystal formations that glowed with their own inner fire. Vextar's 4 eyes were arranged in a diamond pattern on his face, and each one seemed to look in a different direction while somehow still focusing on Jinwoo. When he spoke, his voice came not from his mouth but directly into Jinwoo's mind through the translation device implanted behind his ear. The chamber fell silent as Vextar raised all 4 of his arms in what Jinwoo recognized as a formal greeting gesture. The movement was slow and deliberate, and every other being in the room seemed to hold their breath as they watched. "Human representative," Vextar began, his mental voice carrying undertones that made Jinwoo think of deep ocean currents and distant thunder. "You stand before the Galactic Tribute Council as your species has reached the threshold that requires your presence here today." Jinwoo remained perfectly still, just as he had been trained. He kept his hands at his sides, his back straight, his expression carefully neutral. He had been warned that any sudden movement or show of emotion could be interpreted as either aggression or weakness, both of which would be dangerous in this situation. "For 10,000 of your Earth years," Vextar continued, "the Tribute Council has maintained order and peace throughout this galaxy. We have prevented wars, managed trade disputes, and ensured that the resources of our worlds are distributed fairly among all member species." As Vextar spoke, holographic images appeared in the air around the chamber. Jinwoo saw battles between massive space fleets, planets stripped bare by mining operations, and species that had been driven to extinction by their own conflicts. The images were beautiful and terrible at the same time, showing both the glory and the cost of galactic civilization. "Your species, humanity, has now crossed the threshold that requires your participation in our system," Vextar said, and the holographic images shifted to show Earth from space, then zoomed in to show human cities, factories, and spaceports. "Your population has exceeded 10 billion individuals, and your industrial output has reached levels that register on our galactic economic sensors." Jinwoo watched as the images showed human achievements. The first moon landing, the construction of orbital stations, the development of faster-than-light travel. But he also saw what the aliens saw, a species that was growing rapidly, consuming resources at an incredible rate, and expanding into space with the same aggressive energy that had driven human expansion across Earth. "The tribute assessment for your world," Vextar announced, and Jinwoo felt his heart begin to beat faster despite his training, "includes the following requirements: 20% of all planetary resources, including rare Earth elements and water reserves. Complete technological blueprints for your nuclear, digital, and space travel technologies. biological specimens representing your planet's genetic diversity, and 1 million human volunteers for our labor colonies and research facilities. The words hit Jinwoo like physical blows. 1 million people. 20% of Earth's resources. Everything humanity had worked to build and discover, handed over to these aliens who spoke of tribute as if it were as natural as breathing. The chamber waited in absolute silence for his response. Jinwoo could feel the weight of every gaze in the chamber pressing down on him. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. He had practiced this moment 1,000 times in simulations, in front of mirrors, in empty rooms on the journey here. But nothing had prepared him for the actual feeling of standing before these ancient, powerful beings who controlled the fate of entire star systems. His military training kicked in automatically. Keep your breathing steady. Maintain eye contact. Project confidence even when you feel none. These were lessons learned in basic training on Earth, but they seemed just as important here in this alien chamber millions of light years from home. Jinwoo took one deliberate step forward. His boot made contact with the crystalline floor and produced a sharp, clear sound that rang through the chamber like a bell. The echo seemed to go on, bouncing off the living walls and traveling up into the darkness above. It was as if the chamber itself was designed to amplify and extend every sound, turning even the smallest noise into something dramatic and significant. He raised his head and looked directly at Council Prime Vextar. The alien's 4 eyes were each the size of dinner plates, and they seemed to swirl with colors that had no names in any human language. Looking into them was like staring into deep pools of liquid starlight. For a moment, Jinwoo felt dizzy, as if he might fall forward into those impossible depths. Then he turned his gaze slowly across the assembled delegates. Each species was more incredible than the last. The glass-like beings seemed to glow brighter as his eyes passed over them, their internal light pulsing faster as if responding to his attention. The armored giants shifted in their massive chairs, producing grinding sounds like tectonic plates moving against each other. The floating gas creatures expanded and contracted like breathing clouds, their colors shifting from calm blues to agitated reds and oranges. Jinwoo had spent months studying these species, learning their body language, their cultural customs, their ways of showing respect or aggression. He knew that the crystalline confederacy communicated through light patterns, that the armored legion showed dominance through stillness rather than movement, and that the cloud dancers expressed emotions through color and shape changes that were as complex as any spoken language. He also knew that what he was about to do would shock them all beyond anything they had experienced in their long lives. When Jinwoo finally spoke, his voice was steady and clear. He had trained for years to project his voice properly, and now it carried to every corner of the vast chamber without any need for artificial amplification. Each word was pronounced carefully and distinctly, in the universal trade language that all council members understood. No. The word seemed to take on a life of its own as it left his lips. It hung in the air between him and the council like a solid object, visible and undeniable. The chamber's acoustics caught the sound and held it, letting it echo and re-echo until it seemed to fill every corner of the enormous space. For several long seconds nothing happened. The delegates sat or stood or floated in complete stillness, as if they had all been turned to stone by the simple power of that single syllable. The only movement in the chamber was the gentle pulsing of the wall crystals and the slow drift of the floating gas beings. Then the translation systems throughout the chamber began to work frantically. Jinwoo could see holographic displays flickering to life as computer systems ran his word through thousands of different linguistic databases. The machines seemed confused, almost panicked as they searched for alternative meanings or cultural contexts that might explain what they had just heard. The first delegate to react was Tihuesera of the Void Swimmers. She was a creature that looked like a cross between a dolphin and an octopus, with smooth blue skin and tentacles that ended in delicate finger-like appendages. Her entire body was covered in patches of bioluminescent cells that normally glowed with a soft, steady light. Now those patches were flashing in rapid, chaotic patterns that Jinwoo recognized as extreme confusion and disbelief. "Clarification requested," she said, her voice transmitted through the water-filled communication device that allowed her to speak in the chamber's air-filled environment. Did the human representative just refuse? Her question seemed to break the spell that had frozen the other delegates. A low murmur began to spread through the chamber as beings turned to each other, seeking confirmation of what they had just witnessed. The murmur grew louder as more voices joined in, creating a sound like distant thunder or ocean waves breaking against a shore. Council Prime Vextar's reaction was the most dramatic of all. His 4 eyes, which had been focused on Jinwoo with steady intensity, suddenly dilated in sequence. First the top eye, then the left, then the right, then the bottom, each one expanding until the colored iris nearly disappeared entirely. Jinwoo had studied Vexstar's species extensively, and he knew that this was a sign of extreme bewilderment, the kind of reaction reserved for encounters with something completely outside their understanding of how the universe worked. Vexstar's mental voice, when it finally came, carried undertones of confusion and growing anger. "Human Jinwoo," he said, and each word seemed to press against Jinwoo's mind with increasing force. "Perhaps your translation matrix is malfunctioning. The Tribute Council does not make requests. We issue requirements. Your species compliance is not optional." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of 10,000 years of unquestioned authority. The moment Jinwoo spoke his refusal, everything in the chamber changed. Red warning lights suddenly blazed to life from hidden panels in the walls, casting everything in a bloody, pulsing glow. The gentle hum that had filled the air was replaced by a deep, thrumming sound that Jinwoo could feel in his bones. It was like standing inside the heart of some massive machine that was powering up for war. Heavy blast doors slid shut over the chamber's exits with metallic clangs that echoed through the space. Jinwoo heard the hiss of air systems changing over to emergency settings, and he felt a slight pressure change in his ears as the chamber was sealed off from the rest of the space station. Energy fields flickered to life around the observation galleries where lesser delegates watched the proceedings, creating barriers of crackling blue light. The beautiful crystalline walls began to change color, shifting from their peaceful blues and purples to angry reds and oranges. Weapon ports opened in the ceiling like metal flowers blooming in reverse, revealing the dark mouths of energy cannons that could turn a person to ash in seconds. The very air seemed to vibrate with barely controlled power, making Jinwoo's skin tingle and his hair stand on end. Council Prime Vexstar rose from his throne-like chair, his forearms spreading wide in a gesture that made him look even more massive and intimidating. When he spoke again, his mental voice had changed completely. Gone were the formal, ceremonial tones he had used before. Now his words carried undertones that most species found absolutely terrifying, frequencies and harmonics that triggered primal fear responses in nearly every known form of intelligent life. "Human," Vexstar said, and the word seemed to hit Jinwoo like a physical blow. "You speak as though your primitive little world could somehow resist the combined might of the Galactic Council. Your species has barely managed to achieve faster-than-light travel, and even that technology is crude and inefficient compared to our standards." As Vexstar spoke, holographic displays materialized around the chamber, showing the true scale of the Council's power. Jinwoo saw massive fleets of warships, each one larger than Earth's biggest cities. He saw planet-killing weapons that could crack worlds in half, space stations the size of moons, and armies of robotic soldiers numbering in the trillions. "You possess no defense fleets worthy of the name," Vexstar continued, his mental voice growing stronger and more oppressive with each word. "Your orbital platforms are primitive toys compared to our weapons. You have made no military alliances among the established powers because no established power would waste their time with such a young and insignificant species." The other delegates began to murmur their agreement. The armored giants nodded their massive heads, producing sounds like boulders grinding together. The crystalline beings flashed in patterns that Jinwoo recognized as expressions of contempt and amusement. Even the peaceful cloud creatures seemed to pulse with colors that suggested they found the humans' defiance both foolish and entertaining. But Jinwoo remained perfectly calm. In fact, if anything, he seemed to relax slightly as the chamber filled with threats and displays of overwhelming power. He reached slowly into the inner pocket of his uniform, moving with deliberate care so that no one could mistake his action for an aggressive move. What he pulled out looked like nothing special at all. It was a simple data crystal, no bigger than his thumb, made of what appeared to be ordinary clear material. It caught the pulsing red light from the warning systems and threw it back in tiny rainbow fragments, but otherwise it looked like something that might contain a family photo or a favorite piece of music. Jinwoo held the crystal up between his thumb and forefinger, making sure that every sensor and camera in the chamber could get a clear view of it. Immediately, scanning beams from dozens of different sources focused on the small device. Threat assessment systems throughout the station began working furiously, analyzing every molecule of the crystal and its contents. "You are absolutely correct, Council Prime," Jinwoo said, his voice as calm and steady as if he were discussing the weather back on Earth. "Humanity has no defense fleets that could stand against yours. We have no orbital weapons platforms that could threaten your ships. We have made no military alliances because, frankly, we knew that no one would be willing to stand with us against the established galactic powers." He paused for a moment, slowly rotating the crystal between his fingers so that it caught the light from different angles. The scanning beams followed its movement, and Jinwoo could see readouts beginning to appear on screens throughout the chamber as the analysis system started to decode what the crystal contained. What we do have, Jinwoo continued, is a very particular way of looking at problems. You see, humans have a saying, if you can't beat them, change the game. Delegate Tvsara's bioluminescent patches were now flashing so rapidly they looked like strobe lights. The patterns were becoming increasingly frantic, showing levels of agitation that Jinwoo had never seen in any of his diplomatic training materials. Explain yourself immediately, she demanded, her voice rising to a pitch that made the water in her communication tank bubble violently. What is that device? What game are you talking about? Jinwoo smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the kind of smile that predators showed just before they revealed their fangs. 3 years ago, when your people first made contact with Earth and informed us that we would eventually be required to pay tribute to the Galactic Council, our leaders gathered the brightest scientists and engineers on our planet. They asked them a very simple question. The analysis results were beginning to appear on screens around the chamber, and Jinwoo could see several delegates recoiling in shock as they read the initial findings. The readouts on the screens around the chamber were now complete, and the silence that followed was deeper than the vacuum of space itself. Jinwoo watched as delegate after delegate read the analysis of his small crystal, and he saw their reactions change from confusion to disbelief to absolute terror. Council Prime Vextar's 4 eyes had gone completely black, the pupils dilated so wide that no color remained visible. His massive frame seemed to shrink in on itself as he processed what the scanners had revealed. When he finally spoke, his mental voice was barely a whisper, stripped of all the power and authority it had carried just moments before. You are describing the extinction of all life in this galaxy, he said, and each word seemed to cost him tremendous effort to produce. Jinwoo nodded calmly as if they were discussing something as simple as the weather on a pleasant spring day. Not all life, Council Prime. The cascade effect only works on stars of a certain size and type. Red dwarf stars are too small to sustain the reaction. They would remain completely unaffected. He began to walk slowly around the chamber, his boots clicking steadily against the crystalline floor. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the deathly quiet that had fallen over the assembly. As he moved, every eye, sensor, and detection system in the room followed his progress. You see, Jinwoo continued, his voice conversational and relaxed, we humans have spent the last 3 years doing more than just preparing for this diplomatic meeting. We have been very busy establishing colonies in star systems that most galactic civilizations consider worthless and uninteresting. New holographic displays flickered to life around the chamber, showing star charts and system maps that made several delegates gasp in shock. The displays revealed dozens of small hidden settlements scattered across the galaxy, each one built around red dwarf stars that were so dim and unremarkable that no major civilization had bothered to explore them. These settlements are completely self-sufficient, Jinwoo explained as he continued his slow circuit of the chamber. We have developed closed-loop life support systems that can sustain human populations indefinitely. We have created genetic preservation banks containing the DNA of every important species from Earth. We have built manufacturing facilities that can produce everything from food to advanced technology using only the resources available in these remote systems. The crystalline beings were now pulsing with lights so dim they were barely visible, a sign of deep shock among their species. The armored giants sat motionless in their chairs, their red eyes fixed on Jinwoo with expressions of what could only be described as horrified fascination. Even the cloud creatures had contracted into tight, dense formations that barely moved at all. Our calculations indicate that approximately 12% of Earth's current population could be evacuated to these hidden colonies before the cascade effect reaches our home system, Jinwoo said, his tone as matter-of-fact as if he were reading from a grocery list. That represents over 1 billion human beings, scattered across dozens of star systems that your intelligence services have never discovered and probably never will. He stopped walking and turned to face Vextar directly. And every single one of those billion survivors will know exactly why their beautiful blue-green home world had to die. They will remember who demanded tribute that their people could not and would not pay. They will carry that knowledge with them for the rest of their lives, and they will pass it down to their children and their children's children. The implications of what Jinwoo was describing hit the assembled delegates like a physical force. Several of the smaller species immediately activated their emergency evacuation protocols, their personal transport systems powering up with high-pitched whines. Warning alarms began sounding throughout the chamber as automated systems detected the signs of mass panic among the delegates. Delegate HFY's bioluminescent patches were now flashing so erratically that they looked like a malfunctioning electrical system. Her voice, when she managed to speak, was high and strained with terror. "You are holding the entire galaxy hostage," she said, her words coming out in rapid, breathless bursts. "You are threatening to murder trillions of innocent beings just to avoid paying tribute to the Council." Jinwoo's expression remained calm and reasonable, as if he were patiently explaining a simple concept to a confused child. "No, Delegate Titoisasera. We are not holding anyone hostage. We are simply declining to be victims." He held up the crystal again, and this time Jinwoo could see fear in the eyes of every being that looked at it. This device contains more than just the technical specifications for the cascade effect. It also contains what humans call a dead man's switch. The chamber fell even quieter, if such a thing were possible. Jinwoo could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, steady and strong despite the magnitude of what he was revealing. "If I do not return safely to Earth within 72 standard hours," he continued, "or if any hostile action is taken against any human settlement, ship, or individual anywhere in the galaxy, the cascade effect will activate automatically. There is no way to stop it once it begins, and there is no way to reverse it once it starts." Council Prime Vextar's 4 arms were shaking visibly now, trembling like leaves in a strong wind. His mental voice, when he finally managed to speak again, was barely audible. What do you want from us?" Jinwoo smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in the expression. "Nothing that you have not already given us, Council Prime. We want to be left alone to develop at our own pace, to explore the galaxy on our own terms, and to trade freely with anyone willing to deal with us fairly. We do not want your tribute system. We do not want your protection. We want exactly what we had before you decided we owed you something simply for existing." The days after Jinwoo left the council chambers were unlike anything in the 10,000-year history of the Galactic Council. Emergency meetings were called every few hours as new information came flooding in from intelligence services across the galaxy. The great chamber that had once been a place of calm, orderly proceedings became a hive of frantic activity, with delegates arriving and departing at all hours as the full scope of humanity's preparations became clear. The first emergency session was called just 6 hours after Jinwoo's departure. Council Prime Vextar, looking as though he had aged several decades in those few hours, stood before a room filled with the galaxy's most brilliant scientists and military strategists. Holographic displays covered every surface, showing complex mathematical equations and theoretical physics models that made even the most advanced minds struggle to keep up. "The analysis is complete," announced Dr. Kethval, the Council's chief scientific advisor. His crystalline form flickered with pale, worried light as he spoke. "The human specifications for what they call the Hawking Cascade are mathematically sound. More than that, they are elegant in their simplicity and absolutely terrifying in their implications. The equations floating in the air around the chamber showed how a relatively small device could trigger a chain reaction that would spread from star to star like wildfire. Once started, the cascade would be impossible to stop, and every star it touched would become unstable within 1 standard year. The physics were so straightforward that even junior scientists could understand them, which somehow made the whole thing even more frightening. By the 3rd emergency session, intelligence reports were coming in from every corner of the galaxy. Scout ships had been dispatched to investigate the remote red dwarf systems that the humans had mentioned, and what they found there shocked everyone who saw the data. "The settlements are real," reported Intelligence Director Mordun, his armored bulk casting long shadows in the chamber's dim lighting. "Not only are they real, but our dating analysis shows that some of them have been under construction for 15 years. 15 years? That means the humans began this project long before we ever made first contact with their species." The implications of this discovery rippled through the assembled delegates like waves through still water. The humans had not been reacting to the Council's tribute demands. They had been preparing for complete independence from galactic civilization before they had even known that galactic civilization existed. During the 7th emergency session, Delegate Telesisera asked the question that everyone was thinking but no one wanted to voice. Her bioluminescent patches were dim with exhaustion, and her voice carried the weariness of someone who had not slept in days. "How long have they been planning this?" she asked. "How long have the humans been preparing to say no to us?" The answer came from a junior analyst whose species Jinwoo had never seen before, tall, thin beings with multiple eyes and voices that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Based on the construction dates of their hidden colonies and the development timeline for their cascade technology, we estimate that the humans began planning for galactic independence approximately 15 to 20 years ago. This was well before our first contact protocols were ever transmitted to their world. The silence that followed this announcement was profound. Every delegate in the chamber was trying to process what they had just heard. The humans had not been planning a defense against the Council's demands. They had been planning for a future where they would never have to answer to anyone but themselves. It was during the 10th emergency session that an unexpected voice spoke up. Elder Nixthara was one of the oldest beings on the Council, a cloud creature whose species had been part of galactic civilization since its very beginning. She rarely spoke in formal sessions, preferring to observe and listen, but when she did speak, everyone paid attention. "Perhaps," she said, her voice carrying harmonics of deep thought and ancient wisdom, "we should consider what the humans have given us, rather than focusing only on what they have threatened to take away." The chamber fell silent as delegates turned to focus on the elderly being. Her gaseous form had taken on colors that indicated serious contemplation. Deep purples and blues that swirled together like a living nebula. "When was the last time any of us faced genuine uncertainty?" she continued. "When was the last time we encountered a problem that could not be solved with overwhelming force or economic pressure? When was the last time we had to consider that our carefully ordered universe might contain variables that we had not calculated?" Her words hung in the air like a challenge. The truth was that most species in the galaxy had not faced real uncertainty in centuries. The Council's power had been so absolute, so unquestioned, that the very concept of someone saying no had become unthinkable. As the emergency sessions continued, a strange thing began to happen. The initial panic and outrage gradually gave way to something that few delegates had experienced in their lifetimes: genuine curiosity about what might come next. 3 months after Jean Wu's single word had shattered 10,000 years of galactic order, official proclamations went out to every member world in the galaxy. The language was careful and diplomatic, but the message was clear. The tribute system was suspended indefinitely, pending what the proclamation called a comprehensive review of interspecies relations protocols. In the deepest vaults beneath the Council chambers, protected by security systems that could withstand the death of stars, a single data crystal sat in a specially designed containment field. It would be preserved there until the end of time itself, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe was not a fleet of warships or a planet-killing device, but simply the courage to speak one word, no,